Hi, welcome to Module 5B of our 6-week online trauma training program. And in this module, we're going to discuss just two concepts. One is dealing with some considerations before beginning treatment. And the other is a model we call PIDIB, which will allow you to begin doing trauma treatment with your clients immediately in a safe and predictable way. So some of the considerations all of us have, I know these are things that are always in the back of my mind when I'm doing treatment, especially trauma treatment, is first of all, creating a safe venue. With traumatized clients, safety is one of the key issues. Their safety has been violated, and I certainly don't want therapy to provide an unsafe, traumatizing experiencing. I want us to be trustworthy. I want the client to feel safe with us, feel that they can trust us, and feel that they can actually experience and explore therapy with us as a companion. And finally, maintaining connectedness. The power of the alliance, the power of the interview cannot be overstated. It is essential, it is important, it is necessary for good trauma therapy. So this is my little metaphor to sort of support what I just said. For those of you who don't live in Florida, we have a law in the state which basically says that if you live in Florida and if you own property in Florida, you must own a pool. And so my wife and I, being law-abiding citizens, have this pool. It's an Olympic-sized pool. It's in our backyard. It's 50 meters long. And this side here is the shallow side. It's 2.5 feet deep. This is the deep end. It's 15 feet. And this is a 10-meter diving platform. And I don't know if you've ever stood at the bottom of a platform this high, but it is extremely high when you're down here. But what's interesting, and it's probably due to physics, is when you get up on top of the 10-meter board or the 10-meter platform, when you look down, it's twice as high. Don't know how that happens. And if you dive or if you jump, it's very fast, a little scary. You hit the water hard and you go deep. And that's my little metaphor to kind of share what I think good trauma therapy or good trauma resolution is involved with. And that's going into some deeply repressed feelings, memories, and to bring them up. However, what I don't believe is that we begin trauma treatment here, and we just go right in. What I like to believe is that clients meet us somewhere here, and over time we gradually make it to this end of the pool. Failure to approach trauma-related material gradually is likely to lead to intensification of PTSD symptomatology. And one of the ways to avoid that is to allow the client to take us slowly here. Eventually we'll get here, and therapists sometimes in their zeal to help clients kind of lose sight of the fact that therapy itself, although it's intended to help, can also be traumatizing. So that's something I keep in my head, and I want to make sure that we create a very safe experience for the clients. And one of the ways we do that is with our PIDIB model, and I hope you like it. Typically half the people like it, who see it, half the people use it, adopt it, share it with friends and colleagues because it's very simple. And typically half of the people who see it don't like it, don't share it because they think it's too simple. So let's see which category you fall into. This is the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker. Love that slide. So PIDIB wasn't born as PIDIB. It was actually born as Doobie Vision. But Mindy Raji did a doctoral dissertation on it. And she said, I'm not doing any dissertation that has your name. And so she named it PIDIB. And PIDIB stands for the first letter of each of the 5 stages. Now, the PIDIB model encompasses all of these issues, but we're only going to look at it as a rapid case conceptualization model. And I like it because it allows you to meet the clients where they are at the moment, and to begin therapy safely. Without going into my long explanation as to why I don't like the DSM, let me just say this, that I'm a therapist, and I believe the DSM does not really drive treatment. I believe that we need a case conceptualization model that will drive treatment that's easy for the therapist to do, but it's also easy for the client to understand. So let's see whether or not PIDIB fulfills this mission. So the PIDIB does all of these things. It works with most populations, doesn't require an expertise in diagnosis, doesn't require diagnosis at all. Although if you want to diagnose, if you need to diagnose, PIDIB accommodates diagnosis very well. It's very reliable, maybe 100% reliable once you get to learn this particular model, which is very easy. But it is 100% valid because there is a step for validation built right into this PIDIB model. So the inspiration for PIDIB actually came from this man. His name is Roger Solomon. Roger was my level 2 EMDR trainer, and I like him and I like what he does so well that I took 4 or 5 additional postgraduate training, CEU trainings with Roger, and I also trained in critical incident stress management with Roger. And in the first training I did with Roger, he was talking about how clients heal their way through trauma. And this is a stage model. It has its limitations. But essentially, clients have to resolve these issues with safety before they can resolve issues of control, before they can resolve issues of responsibility and then self-esteem. And when Roger was doing that, I was thinking, wow, Roger, you're up to a good thing here. This probably is not just a trauma-centered model. This probably applies to every client that we work with. So I know you know what DSM-5 looks like. It's this thick and not the easiest thing to use. But I believe everything or almost everything in DSM, if you boil it down to its basics, is probably one of these. And when I first realized that, I shared that with Roger, and he said, great, go with it, Mike. Brought it back to the university, and some of my students liked it. But one of them said, Mike, you're missing mental illness. And so we did include mental illness, and I'll show you that on the next slide. So this is the inspiration for the PIDIB model, which of course originally was called DubiVision. And PIDIB was developed by Mindy by taking the first letter of each of these 5 stages. Now, what you'll notice here is that stage 3 dynamics has an asterisk. And dynamics essentially refers to the therapeutic relationship, which should belong here. But if you did that, then it would be DPIIB, which is unpronounceable, not an acronym. So using poetic license, we moved it here. And bridge we refer to as homework, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a later slide. So PIDIB is client-centered. It's non-Rogerian client-centered. That is, the client essentially controls the entire process, as you'll see. It's validating. There is a validation step built in, and it is client empowering because it is the client who selects the issue that we're going to work with, the intervention, goals, when it's over, and so on. And this quote here comes from the first edition of The Heart and Soul of Change. Diagnoses or presumed deficits have never been related to change in any way. Obviously, something I have a very strong belief in. So stage 1 is the presenting problems, and it's this stage that drives the entire model. In fact, it's this stage that develops the clinical issues that the client and you will be working with. So must be used in the client's own words, and no interpretation or analysis by the professional is allowed. So I can't type fast enough to get everything the client is saying, so I reflect back a few keywords, a key phrase, whatever. But it's important that those words or phrases I reflect back are the client's own and not mine. So those are the presenting problems, and from the presenting problems, we get these 5 issues. Now you'll see here that I've added reality testing, and that's the 5th issue, and that's what I use to describe psychosis or mental illness. It's a more benign term for the clients. And what I always do, and I always do this in the first session, is I explain these issues to the clients. And it's obviously a lot easier for me to teach clients safety, control, responsibility, self-esteem, reality testing, than it is to talk about schizoaffective, schizotypal, schizoid, borderline personality, bipolar 1, bipolar 2. It's just easier, and the client understands it a lot better. So when we talk about safety, we talk about physical, psychological safety. And this is an extremely powerful issue, and it may be the most difficult to treat because, after all, everybody who has this traumatic stress problem has had safety compromised, and sometimes quite extremely, as many of you know. And closely related to safety is control, because by definition, somebody who's been traumatized has been victimized. And it doesn't matter whether they're victimized by a tsunami or an abusive spouse or a car accident, they've been abused. And also, I know that there are substance abuse counselors, addictions therapists out there, and whether you agree with the 12-step model or not is really not important. But if you look at the first of the 12 steps, it talks about having no power over your addiction. So on one level, addiction is certainly a control issue, at least how I look at it. And there is a form of substance abuse treatment which is called rational addiction therapy, which is founded on this particular model that substance abuse is a control issue. Responsibility, in Roger talk anyway, refers to guilt, shame, and blame. And if I refer back to the case of Kevin in Module 1, after he drove over this explosive and he began talking in therapy, the first things he talked about was his terrible sense of guilt, shame, and self-blame that he had murdered his friends. So this is also an important issue, and sometimes survivors have issues simply about surviving without the overt guilt, shame, and blame. And self-esteem seems almost not to belong here, but it does, because in many cases, self-esteem is compromised even after people are healed from PTSD because they feel guilty or something is wrong with them, or somehow they've been compromised because they have this self-esteem issue. And I'll speak briefly about reality testing. I'm a private practitioner, so this is something that doesn't occur to me commonly. It's very rare. But if somebody comes in and I do suspect a mental illness, I will always seek a second opinion. I'll give you an example of one that happened several years ago. I live in Sarasota, Florida, a very wealthy community. And he's a 29-year-old man, who came in who had just inherited over $100 million. And his sister did not inherit $100 million. And he came in because he believed that she put a computer chip in his skull and she was controlling his thoughts. It's pretty scary, actually. What was scarier was that he had 3 children, ages 5 and younger, and he believed she put these computer chips in their skulls as well. So clearly I was working with mental illness. I referred him to a psychiatrist we work with. She's been providing his medications, monitoring his medications for 3 or 4 years. And we referred him to another therapist who specializes in working with this kind of a client. Doesn't happen often with me. Clients I do see that have mental illness almost always are seeing a physician or they're in a addictions program or something. So this is my quick reality testing quiz, and I do this during the presenting problem, so it's not a very wide window, and you don't often see these things immediately. The young man I just described was unusual. But what you do see, and you do see this often, is this: is there something strange about the person? Now, most of our clients are strange anyway. But this is a different kind of strange. This is a, what's going on kind of strange. And sometimes we can't name it. Sometimes we get real nervous by it, but we can't put our fingers on it and we leave it. And I suggest to you that if you feel or you experience something strange, it's because your client is communicating something strange, which is probably a really good idea for you to get a second opinion. So the therapeutic alliance, which drives treatment, is usually stage 1, because you can't really have therapy if you don't have the therapeutic alliance. And I maintain that if we understand and are sensitive to transference, this will really help us begin doing therapy quickly and effectively. I also know that dynamics can change within and between meetings, so it's something we need to be aware of. And of course, these transference issues are unconscious. So we need to be particularly aware of the relationship and the subtleties of the relationship while we're doing therapy. The stage 4, which is stage 4 interventions, is essentially friendly to any kind of therapy that you do. It's sensitive to DSM kinds of therapies. It's sensitive to palliative therapies. It works really well. And, as I said, these are really, really easy issues to form. And I'll do a demonstration momentarily. Stage 5 is the bridge, which I'll mention briefly. It deals with homework, and I do homework with my clients. But I will talk in depth about the bridge at the end of the cognitive behavior therapy module. So I'm just going to leave it now and say that, yes, we do homework, but we'll talk about it a little later. So this is the case of Todd. Obviously, this is not Todd. But Todd is a client of mine, or was a client of mine. And I have his permission to use his name and to talk about his case. And I also see him from time to time, so I kind of am kept up to date with his life. So what I'm going to do is take 5 minutes. I'm going to present to you the way Todd presented to me in his very first session. And then once I get done with that, I'll show you how we do a palliative. I'll show you how easy it is, and I'll show you how effective it is. And hopefully you'll like it, and hopefully you'll do with it. So now I'm Todd, and I was born in Bradenton in Southwest Florida, and I grew up there when I was very young. My father left. I don't remember him, don't know much about him, but I was brought up by my mother, who was a school teacher, and I was an only child, and it was a wonderful childhood. Even though it was just the two of us, we also had an extended family, and so I had a very happy childhood. In fact, what I remember most about my childhood is that all I did was play ball, and I was very good at it. I was so good at it that when I was a high school freshman, I was on 3 varsity teams. And that was unusual because most of the varsity members were juniors and seniors. And I loved it because I was as good as they were. And also in my freshman year, I began dating my high school sweetheart. And she was also an athlete, so I would watch her compete. She would watch me compete. We'd work out together. We'd hang out together. Never got in trouble. We never did drugs. We never did alcohol. We just hung out, we dated, and we played sports. In my senior year, I was awarded a football scholarship to a Division I university, Florida State University, and that was a dream come true. I couldn't believe it. It was something I had fantasized about for as long as I could remember. I was so intent on doing well that I began working really hard in training for summer camp. And I remember running one day and I stepped into a hole. I broke my ankle in 2 places. I wrecked my knee. I needed 4 surgeries and a year to rehab. And at the end of that, there was no scholarship. I didn't feel like going to college anyway, which really annoyed my mother. But what I did was I enlisted. And I served 2 tours in Fallujah, in Iran, and in Iraq. And when I first got there, the first night that I was there, I drank my first 6-pack. I didn't even know how to drink a 6-pack. But these guys just kept handing me 1 can of beer after the next, and I would drink it, and another can, and another can. And at the end of the 6th can, I just bent over and I just began to vomit and vomit and vomit, and I felt awful. And these guys were laughing at me. And I remember thinking, I will never again drink alcohol. But from that night until last night, and every night in between, I've never had less than 1 6-pack. And I got to tell you, I drink more than a 6-pack. And sometimes I drink more than beer. And sometimes I take more than alcohol. And I remember midway through my 2nd tour, it was on a Sunday, we were waiting for the NFL game to come on. We were drinking and laughing and having fun. And my best friend, who was sitting next to me, was killed by a sniper with a bullet through his head. And it exploded all over me. And from that night on until last night, and every night, I go to bed thinking about him. I wake up thinking about him. I cannot get it out of my mind. It's just there all of the time. And after I was discharged, I came home. I moved back in with my mother, watched TV, got drunk, hung out on the couch. My mother got me a job with the school board that lasted 5 weeks, and they fired me. And after I got fired, my mother did not talk to me once, not one word, for a year. But during that time, I began dating my old high school girlfriend. We decided to get married. She got me a job working for my now father-in-law, who owns a machine shop. And I hate it, and I hate him. He doesn't treat me well. He doesn't pay me well. My wife's brother, who works there, will inherit the business when my father-in-law retires. I hate getting up in the morning and going to work. And at the end of the day, there's a bar right next door. I go for a beer or 2 with a couple of the guys, and I wind up having 4, 5, 6 beers. And then I drive home, and I've already had 1 DUI, so I drive home slowly. I drive home really, really carefully. I take back streets. And when I finally get home, my wife is just all over me. Every night, I just can't deal with it. We have a son. I go into his bedroom. He's always asleep. And I love this kid. This kid is beautiful. And I give him a kiss, and I go out, and my wife is at it again. I make a sandwich. I grab another beer. I go into the den. I put on some pornography. I eat, I drink, and I just pass out. Then I wake up in the morning, and I feel lousy. I have this beautiful wife, and I'm just such a bad husband. And I have this wonderful child, and I'm such a bad father. And I look in the mirror as I shave every morning, and I say, you know, Todd, you're just one big loser. So those were Todd's presenting problems. That was his first day. Usually first day presenting problems take 5 or 10 minutes. After that, they take much less time once the client understands the PIDIB process. And before I do a PIDIB with Todd, let me just say that sometimes I interrupt clients if I think they're just talking and talking, because sometimes talking is a way of avoiding therapy. That was not the case with Todd. In fact, Todd was very eloquent. So I said, I'm going to do the PIDIB now. So I said, Todd, let me just understand what you just said. One of the things you said was, after you've had too much to drink, you drive home slowly, safely, you take back roads because you've already had one DUI, you don't want to get another one. To me, Todd, that sounds like a safety issue. And Todd said, yes, it is a safety issue. So now we have identified one issue and we have validated it. And validation means it's an issue we can work on. Now, suppose Todd said, no, Mike, it's not safety. I would say, okay, Todd, what is it? Because it doesn't matter so much what the issue is as long as it's validated by the client. In this case, that wasn't an issue. Todd said, yes, it's a safety issue. So we now have one issue Todd and I can work with. And then I said, Todd, you say you want to go in for a beer or two after work, and you wind up having 5, 6, 7 beers. To me, that sounds like a control issue. And Todd's already nodding, and he says, yep, it's a control issue. So we've now identified 2 issues, and we have validated them. That means we can work on either or both of these issues. And then I say, Todd, you wake up in the morning and you feel really bad, you feel guilty, you feel ashamed that you're not a good father and you're not a good husband. And to me, that sounds like you have some responsibility issues. And again, Todd agrees. So we've identified and validated 3 issues. And finally, I say, when you look in the mirror in the morning when you're shaving and you say to the reflection, Todd, you're just one big loser. To me, Todd, it sounds like you have some self-esteem issues. He nodded. He agreed. He validated. So we have 4 issues. In language Todd understands, in language I understand. We've done this very quickly. And these are all valid clinical issues. And I would now say to Todd something like, well, we can't work with all 4 at the same time. Which one would you like to begin with? Todd picked self-esteem. It's a client-driven model, and it's all driven from the presenting problem. So we began our first session talking about self-esteem. Now, what you will also notice is I did not mention his friend being sniped and being blown up all over him. That was a clinical decision I made because I felt that was too intense for the first session, and I didn't know Todd that well. However, it is something we spent much time with in future sessions, and we dealt with it really successfully. So Todd had about 16 or 17 sessions with me. At some point, we talked about him going to community college, which he did, and he eventually decided to take a course in cosmetology. And the reason is he was in another course, he didn't like it, but the woman sitting next to him mentioned that her husband had gone through that course, which allowed him to become licensed and to buy a beauty salon, which is exactly what Todd did. He bought a beauty salon, became a business owner, he left his father-in-law. That relationship, by the way, improved. And so now he owns his own business. He's doing okay. He's a very personable guy. His wife works for him. He has a few other employees who work for him. And he feels that he feels very successful. They now have 2 sons. So Todd's living a good life. I see him periodically for updates. So one of the questions people typically ask here is Todd still drinking? And my answer is, of course he is. He's an alcoholic. Hopefully, at some point, he will decide to give up drinking, and I'm really hoping for that. But he hasn't. However, what Todd now does is he drives his wife home. They work together. She wouldn't tolerate him not driving her home. And while she's getting supper ready, he plays with the kids. He'll begin drinking. But by the time he's drunk, the kids are pretty much ready for bedtime. Now, this may be a problem in the future, but right now, he's a nice guy. He's a nice dad. The relationship with his wife is improving. His whole life is improving. So that's Todd. That's PIDIB. I sincerely hope you practice it, and I sincerely hope you like it. As I said, half of the people will like it because it's simple, and half of the people will not like it because it's simple. So that's the end of 5B. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you again in 6A.